nobody in the 60s, 70s, 80s, really even into the 90s, were thinking about space development, space exploration, the importance of that within the context of planetary catastrophes. But that is now a factor that cannot be dismissed. It's too prominent of a factor in planetary history and human history to ignore. And I think we have to be, when we start thinking big picture and we start thinking about the expansion into space, this is now a critical motive for moving ahead and moving into space, because we now realize that, you know, we're vulnerable. We are cosmically vulnerable. As I've said, and I don't know if I originated this or not, but I've said it for years, for decades, which is that we are sitting ducks in a cosmic shooting gallery. And I'd like to cite this near miss from last June, when, we had a 500 to 800 foot asteroid fly way within the orbit of the moon. And
it's not an Armageddon situation. It's something much, much smaller. The Bruce Willis movie overplays the.
Oh yeah.
Right. It's silly, but if you have something that's 800 foot in diameter,
800 feet would pretty much annihilate an area the size of the state of Pennsylvania, roughly. It would not cause locally, it would extinguish all life, right? Globally, no, it would not be a mass extinction event that would leave enough of a fingerprint in the fossil record that could be discerned hundreds of thousands or millions of years down the future. However, what it would do is it would send civilization reeling into a tailspin that might take a decade to recover from, because you would have a huge amount of particulate matter and soot and so forth launched into the atmosphere. And this is going to create a shroud that's going to take easily 2 to 3 years or longer to fully clear out. That is going to cause all kinds of climatic changes. The most immediate effect of it's going to be is after all the secondary firestorms have died down, would be a global cooling that could be equivalent to some of the most extreme years of the Little Ice Age. Well, what did we see in those extreme years of the Little Ice Age was, repeated agricultural failures and food shortages, which led to famine. And those famine led to people being weak. Their immune systems were compromised. And you have large numbers of people with compromised immune systems. This is when opportunistic diseases can cause real pandemics. This is what happened in the early 1300s with the bubonic plague. It was a rapid cooling of the Earth's climate. It's what happened at the Justinian plague in 542 AD. It came on the heels of like 5 or 6 years of an extreme climate anomaly, cold climate anomaly. Well, that's what we would have. And so it would be immediately in the immediate zone of the impact, if it was in a populated area, would be 1 million to 2 million people instantly vaporized to nothing. And then out to 20 to 40 miles radius, you would have all kinds of secondary consequences. 20 miles away from the impact, people are going to be receiving second and third degree burns. 20 miles away, people will be killed by maybe 15 miles away, people would be killed by the sound of the blast. The audio would rupture eardrums, and the fireball in the immediate location of the impact would be about 3 miles in diameter. About 3 miles in diameter. That's pretty hard to envision. Well, in the immediate area of the impact, you're going to have total and utter devastation. Most of the population of the Earth is going to survive the impact. But there's going to be these cascading secondary consequences that are going to take years to fully play out and recover from. And so, it would certainly be in our best interest to prevent something like that. Now, that particular asteroid that passed by the Earth in June was only discovered 2 weeks earlier. But this is why we need a space presence, and why, I think you and I had talked maybe about the proposal to offload a lot of our knowledge and technology and so forth to the moon, and that a moon would be the obvious place to build a like a time capsule that could survive, let's say, a global catastrophe. Now, I'm not anticipating a global catastrophe in the near future, although you can't rule it out. And a lot of my lectures and this podcast itself are going to be addressing the probabilities factors of catastrophe. Obviously, the kind of catastrophe we just described, which would not leave the major imprint, could be discerned thousands of years from now, nonetheless would be an extremely severe event that could literally lead to hundreds of millions of deaths ultimately, right? That is something that we as a society, as a civilization, need to be prepared for, because this is not science fiction. This is not pie in the sky. This is not Armageddon Bruce Willis style, because like what you talked about there is totally unlikely to happen. The odds of an asteroid, what was it, the size of Texas or something?
Yeah.
And that was just ridiculous. And you could have had just as dramatic of a storyline without going so unrealistic. But what we can see is that even an object from 500 to 1,000 feet in diameter is going to have global consequences. And if it hit in the ocean, you're going to have all the coastlines on the ocean it hit in are going to have major tsunami events, right? So anyways, us going into space, humanity going into space, is part of the antidote to that. It's a way that we can maximize, we can shift the probabilities in our favor, right? And part of going into space would be that we use space as a platform to really become intimately knowledgeable about our cosmic environment and the more immediate threats. We just hear what just recently discovered that there is coming by in 2032, right? An asteroid that has right now 2.7% chance of hitting the Earth. Now this is the most dangerous asteroid yet discovered, with the highest odds of striking the Earth. It's not huge. I've forgotten the size of it. I should have brushed up on that before the podcast here, but you might look it up. 2032 asteroid impact, and let's see what we get here. But yeah, once we've moved into space, our options for responding to that increase exponentially. Because for one thing, we're already in a position that we could harness dangerous objects, perhaps deflect them from their orbit, if not harvest them and their resources altogether. And of course, all of this stuff is not just flying at us randomly from deep space. It's all out there orbiting. It's in orbits. These orbits are calculable. We can determine the shape of their orbits, the tempo of their orbits, and we see something, we can predict where it's going to be in the future. And we can then access those objects, the most threatening ones, which it turns out are incredibly valuable with all kinds of resources. You finding anything at all?
So yeah, real quick. Its rating on the Torino scale is a 3. 1 in 32 chance of hitting as of this most recent article via the new Atlas. So 2.7, its impact probability peaked at 2.7, but it scored, no, excuse me, this is Apophis. The 2032 asteroid is a 3. Is a 3 on the Torino scale.
Okay, so does it
0 to 10? 10 is 100% chance likely, and 0 is 0.
And 3 is
significant.
It's very significant. What's the size of it again? We can get.
I'm looking right now.
Size isn't the only variable.
40 to 90
meters
to 90. Wide.
Okay, 90. Okay, so let's say it's 75 meters. Okay, so that's bigger than Tunguska. That's at least 50% bigger than Tunguska. And if it's roughly spherical, a sphere scales by the cube of the radius times 4/3 pi. And that's how you can determine. So this is going to be considerably more destructive. If it was up in the higher range of 90, Oh my gosh. Now it's almost double the diameter of Tunguska, which means that and if it's an asteroid, see, Tunguska was low density. An asteroid is a much denser object. So all things being equal, an asteroid is going to carry a much stronger kinetic punch than a snowball, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, it looks like Tunguska was closer to the snowball end of the spectrum. This thing would be a real ass kicking if it hits the Earth. I mean, it would be a real ass kicking. You're talking about an area the size of probably Texas would be pretty much destroyed.
And a nuclear winter that could
It would
cause some real damage.
It could cause some real damage. Now, this thing has just been discovered. What was the discovery date of this? What is the name of it? Because that year is always.
Yeah, so the 2032 is the expectation. Let's see. I'm looking right now for the date.
The name of the asteroid.
2024 YR4.
2024 YR4. 2024 YR4. Yeah. Yeah, there's actually an animation of that that's really impressive. And they go to the small side of the spectrum. They use that, but it's still impressive as hell. I saw it earlier. I think it's on a NASA site. Yeah, so that would be a major event. And it would send civilization reeling. There would be no country on Earth that did not experience some after effects of an impact of that magnitude. So this is sobering stuff. This is like, again, I've been saying for decades that this is something we need to take seriously. You know, this is not, again, some sci-fi fantasy, you know, but for most people, you know, when you start talking about space, you know, it's just outside their framework of reference because people have been conditioned to be so constricted in their thinking. They're no longer capable of exercising their mind to the extent that they can comprehend we're actually part of a bigger picture. And we have to be thinking big picture if we're going to survive long term. Now, I guess it is that maybe the way it's the human species is divided up, that not everybody can see the big picture. Okay, I admit that and acknowledge that and recognize that. But at the same time, if there's a significant percentage, let's say if 5% of the human population needs to be thinking long term and large scale, the rest of the 95% to survive, well, yeah, if that shrinks to 2%, yeah, then we might start getting in trouble. If it shrinks to 1%, if it expands to 10% of the human population is considering the larger picture and the longer term prospects of human civilization and life on Earth and so on, yeah, that massively increases our probabilities of surviving and being successful. So our education right now system, at least in America, is not oriented towards that. It's oriented about indoctrinating children into this constricted worldview, and there's just a whole set of irrelevant distractions that they're being spoon-fed, and it's a clutter that needs to be cleared out. And the left side of the political spectrum is all, you know, up in arms and hysterical over the possibility of the Department of Education being shut down. Well, you know, then I would bring up the point that, you know, when was it started by Jimmy Carter in 1979? How come as soon as we empowered a large government education bureaucracy, that from that point on, education standards started to go into decline, and they've declined ever since. That literally people were coming up, graduating from high school, going to college and so on, and they were more educated than they are now in the era when when the Department of Education did not exist. Okay. So I don't see this big tragedy ensuing if the Department of Education and all this top-heavy administrative bureaucracy has to go find other jobs. And that money, $100 billion or so a year, is released back into the private sector and will, within 1 or 2 years, fuel a massive renaissance in private sponsored education. And at that point, the worst of the alternatives will be as good or better than the best of the government-run system. I guarantee you that's going to be the case. But what's holding us up? Just this is the state of too many people's minds, thinking that, oh, the only way people are going to get educated is if we empower a gigantic, wasteful, bloated government bureaucracy that then uses the educational system to propagate its own agenda. Well, hopefully, we're going to be done with all of that soon.
Well, you're absolutely correct. And if you look at the averages, I think it's about $1,000 to homeschool your own kids versus a year versus 47 in a lot of districts. It's the same thing with the space program. And you're seeing that, go figure, the private sector, when tasked correctly, in cooperation correctly with the government, with good oversight, there's a lot of yeah buts. But as long as all of that is adhered to, it's amazing what can get done and what is getting done in the private sector with all of these companies that are now being tasked by NASA to deliver payloads.
That is a great development. And, I'm not so extreme in my views that I just like earlier admitted, look, there are some government agencies whose value exceeds the cost of their existence, right? I named the U.S. Geological Survey. Their work is of incredible importance. Without their work, there would be no civilization as we know it, because it's the work of the geologists, many of them who were with the U.S. Geological Survey, that have mapped out bedrock, that have and the types of bedrock, the types of lithology, the types of petrology from which we have been able to extract the energy that has fueled the rise of our civilization, right? Now, I'm of the mind that this fossil fuel-driven period of human civilization is merely an intermediate level of evolution of civilization. I think we're on the verge, literally, of in the next decade moving beyond fossil fuels, because I'm convinced that there are alternate technologies that are now being developed and waiting in the wings. But the point is that the whole fossil fuel driven civilization that we've created in the last century and a half, right, would be indispensable. Without that, we're not getting out into space. Life is not getting off the planet. But once we get off the planet, now we've got options. We've got prospects for things that, it's out there in space where solar energy is actually going to be a viable energy source, not down here on the surface of the planet, right? Where it's, day-night cycle, where it's, rain, where it's clouds, where it's, if the sun ain't shining, if the wind ain't blowing, right? But out there in space, solar energy really does become a viable energy source. And then there's the whole other new technologies that are coming into development. So again, without the fossil fuel-based civilization, we would not have gotten to where we're at now. There would be no satellites, relay satellites up there in orbit around the Earth, allowing you and me to, you're out in Texas, I'm in Georgia, right? We couldn't have done this 20 years ago. Space program, I believe, is one of several things that are going to provide antidotes to that. And if we can get young people inspired with the prospects and possibilities of space, and hey, this is going to be, because I remember the thrill and the excitement of, turning the TV on to see what's happening with the space program, right? With the missions to the moon, and the sense of optimism and hope that would instill in a kid. But now what's happening is, we're doomed. If we don't shut down civilization and stop, if we don't shut down fossil fuel use, zero, right? What is it? Stop oil now, and in movements like that, these people have no idea what they're advocating for. They're dooming us, the human species, back ultimately to a Stone Age type existence. We have to move forward.